Yo, yo, how's it going? Hope you're having a good week so far. On today's episode, it's a good one. So I'm warning you, it's a very good one. Tom Brown is an old friend of mine who I used to work for in Ibiza. I used to work recording DJ sets for him and the BBC. I've known Tom since I was 18, so a long time ago now. We've had some great times in Ibiza. But Tom has also been a huge part of radio in the whole of the UK over the years. So, without further ado, Tom Brown, people, enjoy. Tom Brown, we're live. How you doing, mate?
Hey, Will, great to see you, mate. It's been a long time, hasn't it? It has been a long time. Very well, thanks.
When was the last time we saw each other? I think it was was it Ibiza or was it Bristol Airport? I can't remember.
No, do you know what, mate? I think it was London. I think I saw you in London because I was living in London at the time, and I think I came to meet you at Farringdon Station, and we went and had a few beers. That would have been about 5 or 6 years ago, mate.
I can't remember.
You were just starting to grow the beard. You were just starting on the beard because I didn't recognise you.
That was 7 years ago.
Oh, mate. Am I really 7 years older from then?
Yeah, you don't look it though. This is the thing with you, Tom. This is the thing with you. I've known you since I was 18, I think, and I'm now 30. So I've known you for a fair amount of time. And you literally you never look a day younger or older. Yeah, you look the same.
That's because I always looked old. I always looked old for my age. Now it's catching up with me.
Oh dear. How's summer been without being in Ibiza?
I even looked like this when I was 21.
Did you really?
Sorry, I missed that. Go on.
No worries. I think there's a delay in the internet.
Oh.
It's typical. It's annoying. How's your summer been not being in Ibiza?
I mean, listen, mate, as you know, this is the first year in 26 that I have not been in Ibiza for the summer. So I've missed it. I mean, there's no question about that. Being in another country at this time of the year feels very, very strange. And obviously with everything that's going on over there as well, I feel for the people that are over there as well. I mean, they're having the most chilled out time. I mean, it's amazing. Yeah. There's not a lot of tourists around. Restaurants are still open. The weather is still great as ever. But obviously all the restrictions have completely changed the vibe. So they're kind of experiencing a winter in the summer.
Yeah.
So it's a bit strange for them too. But the hardship side of it is going to be plain. A lot of businesses are missing out. The big businesses, the big clubs are going to survive. The big parties, the big restaurants, the successful venues will breeze through this and probably see this as just a bit of a year off.
Totally.
But I think for most people, this is going to be a tough year over there for sure.
Yeah, it's such a small island, isn't it? So it's like the big guys will just be fine because let's be honest, we all know how much money they've earned over the years and how successful they've been. But it is, you're right, it's the smaller people. And I think a lot of it is like, it's like the day-to-day workers that rely on the summer to kind of keep going for the rest of the year. That's kind of gonna hit them more hard. But before we get into any of this, I think we need to talk about a little bit of how we kind of met and how we know each other. Because there's Ibiza. I don't really talk about Ibiza that much in my life. It was a huge part of my life, but not many people know much about my Ibiza trip. But so I got introduced to you through a friend, Robin Chappell. And what were you like? You ran a production company. Where did that all come from?
Yeah, I mean, the thing with Ibiza is because the season is only about 4 or 5 months, really. And so everybody that goes in there for a season will tend to either do one particular thing, or they will try and do what I do, which is to try and do as many things as you can and just work 24 hours a day and then try and find a few hours at the weekend where you get a bit of sleep and catch up.
Yeah.
So I was one of those people who used to do several things. And I think at the time I met you, I was working at Eden, wasn't I? Which is one of the clubs in San Antonio. And I was an events manager there, which was a full-time job in itself. We were looking at, I think that particular year we'd taken on Pete Tong. I think Pete had come to San Antonio and we were doing a gig called Wonderland.
Yeah.
And I was also looking after an event called Reclaim the Dance Floor, which was run by the people from Ibiza Rocks, which was all kind of upcoming stuff at the time. People like, sort of Chase and Status were headliners all the time. So it was kind of that new sound that was breaking through in 2008, 2009. And also besides that, I was trying to run a lot of aspects of the production of the venue as well, and the marketing and all that sort of stuff. But also as a little sideline, I used to, because my past is all sort of, in the BBC as an events manager, and I started as an engineer. I was a technical studio engineer for a long time at the BBC. And I used to record all the essential mixes in Ibiza. So I think at the time I was not just doing essential mix, but I was also doing a lot of other recordings for a lot of other radio stations and clients and stuff like that. And I needed somebody to help. And I remember speaking to Robin and sort of, because Robin was quite well connected. And I sort of said, look, I'm just looking for somebody who kind of doesn't mind being in a DJ booth, is also going to be prepared to work and not party all the time, because it is work and it's serious work as well. Even though you're in a nightclub and you're kind of in a party environment, there are actually a few of us that work. We actually are there to earn a living and do things properly. So I said, the one thing I don't need is sort of someone who's going to just be there to party and disappear. And he suggested you. So we met, didn't we? I remember meeting you.
Yeah.
And you were quite young, but you knew a lot about the technical side of stuff as well. And so I thought, yeah, this is going to be good. This is going to be good. So we started working on some recordings. And I think the one big one that we used to do was Sundays at Space. We used to go down to Space on Sundays for We Love. And because Sunday was kind of technically my day off, I was actually running their podcast. I was doing a podcast for Space. And Sunday was technically my day off. But I took on this because Sunday was a day off and I wasn't doing anything. So I thought, what the hell? I might as well do a podcast as well on Sunday. But there was no way I could do that on my own. And so you came in on that and I showed you how to twiddle a few knobs and set up a few microphones and things like that. And you used to stay there and record some of the sets. And then because you were living next door to me at the time, which was true, you used to come back, I think, about 9 o'clock in the morning and then sort of leave the SD card under my door or something, or just hold onto it. And then when I got out of bed, or got back from the club, I'd pick up the SD and put the whole podcast together on Monday afternoons. And then by Monday night, this 1 hour podcast went live. And I think at the time it was the number one on the Apple's iTunes chart, because there wasn't a lot of people doing music podcasts at that time. And so we were cruising a wave at the time. It was fantastic. And that's how we met. That's how we first got together.
I never forget. I literally, those We Love Sundays, because it was actually my day off as well. So Sunday was my day off from Orange Corner, because I was a resident Orange Corner at the time. And it was like the one day I took off. And you just spend 16 hours in a club listening to other people's club. But it was literally like some of the best times of my life ever. Like especially when you and Jill? Ruth. How can I forget her name? Sorry, Ruth. We'd all be in the dressing rooms and you do. That's when I first met Claude Von Stroke. You did an interview with him. Ruth did an interview with him in the dressing room, and then he forgot his headphones, so he ended up borrowing mine, which was just another wild story. But how? So for people that don't know, we love Space we love Sundays in Space in Ibiza. How iconic was that as a night? Like, I don't think there's a night like that anymore.
No, there isn't. No, I mean, when it first started, and then it was just called Space on Sundays, because it was the same people that ran Space on Sundays that went on to do We Love Space. And in fact, the main guy that was running it was Darren Hughes, and Darren Hughes was one of the, along with James Barton, was one of the founders of Cream, in Liverpool back in 1992. And I worked with them back in 92 as well, but that's a completely different story. But anyway, here we go. Space on Sundays used to be a 22-hour event that used to start at 6 a.m. on a Sunday, to kind of capture all the people who were leaving clubs in Ibiza at 6 o'clock. So rather than sort of just going nowhere, because it's like when you leave a club at 6, depending on what sort of night you've had, you can still be up for a bit of a vibe, really. It's too early to go to bed. You're still kind of, you're quite charged up. So they kind of hit on this idea of starting the club at 6 a.m., which is what they did. And then it would run through until, like I say, 4 a.m. Sunday morning. And I can remember recording for the BBC, I don't know when it was, back in around about 2004, 2005, doing the whole 22 hours. I did the whole 22 hours at Space.
Brutal.
And I did that a couple of times. And that was pretty brutal stuff, really. But was fantastic.
Yeah.
It was still great to do it. But We Love is and Sundays at Space was just completely iconic within the clubbing calendar for that kind of 90s, early millennium sort of generation of clubbers. And it would have, all kinds of people, little bit, it had 6 rooms of music, which was the first thing. There were 6 different, well, they used to call them arenas, but some of the rooms were quite small, only hold about 200 people. But then you had the main discoteca, which would hold, 2,500, 3,000 people. You had the terrace that was also around about the same numbers. And each arena would have different music. So the discotheque was quite dark, as you remember, very, very kind of heavy techno sometimes. That have people like, Jeff Mills would play in there. I know Carl Cox did a few before he started doing his own night. You'd have the Chemical Brothers used to come and do, 1 or 2 sets there. There was, I think every week they had something like around about 40 DJs playing at this event. So it was a huge event, and was packed out every week. And the great thing about it was that you could go at 6 a.m, get the stamp on your wrist, and then go off and get some sleep, and then come back again in the afternoon or come back in the evening and do the rest of it. So they used to have shifts of crowds that would come in at different times. And depending on what time of the day you went, the music was completely different. So when it was around about, when it was that kind of sunset time, you couldn't see sunset from there. It was the wrong side of the island. It was on the eastern side of the island. So, but they would still do the Sunset Terrace, which would go on till midnight. And the Sunset Terrace tended to be kind of quite funky and a little bit off the wall, in terms of music and who would play there. Musically, it would kind of go right up to a peak, up to about midnight. And then after that finished, they would clear the terrace because you couldn't do music outside after midnight because of the licensing laws. And then everybody would pile inside and go into the discotheca and carry on. So this was the big event in Ibiza at that time. It was absolutely huge. And if you go onto YouTube now or go onto the internet and just put We Love Sundays at Space, you can still see some of the amazing imagery from that era. Amazing time.
Literally, so I'm so happy that I got to kind of experience that, because Manumission was kind of similar as well. Well,
Manumission used to do a carry-on. So what would happen is that Manumission was on Monday night. So you'd have We Love Space on Sundays, and then you have Manumission on Monday. And so between the 2 sets of promoters, what they tried to do was to try and kind of just corner off that whole 48 hours. So what they would do is get people to go to Space on Sundays, of course, and everybody went, because Ibiza back in the day, and when I say back in the day, I'm not talking that long ago, 10, 15 years ago. We're not going back, to the 80s or 90s or anything like that. But Ibiza was all about the music. Music was all it was. It wasn't about VIP culture. It wasn't about celebrities. It was none of that back then. That's all changed. It's evolved into that now. So people would go for the music. So they would look for the best musical event. And so We Love was the epitome of that. But then people would also want to go to the kind of the spectacular, the showtime spectacular of the week as well, because people would go for 7 days. It'd be a 7-day holiday, and that was manumission. So what they did was that Space would finish at 6 a.m. on Sunday, and people would try and stick it out till 6. Go and get some sleep, go and lie by the pool, go and sit on the beach, go and do whatever you did. And then Monday night was manumission. So that same crowd would go to manumission. And whenever you left Space after midnight, back in the days of flyers, back before we had social media, people would be thrusted a flyer as they left Space, which was for manumission. And so it'd be like, oh, we got to go to manumission tomorrow. So manumission would happen. And then when manumission finished at 6 a.m. on Tuesday morning, Space would have a carry-on, the manumission carry-on that would start at 6 a.m.
Yeah.
So they tried to get from 6 a.m. Sunday to 6 a.m. Tuesday just into those two parties. And they were incredibly successful at it as well. It was amazing times. And then Wednesday was a day off.
Yeah.
Completely.
Did you know that I didn't DJ, but I performed at manumission? I was one of the, when it moved to Amnesia, I was, for one of the nights, I was one of their dancers.
Yeah, get out of here. Were you really?
I wasn't actually.
Fantastic.
I wasn't, because my ex-girlfriend was a dancer then, and she was one of their dancers, and they needed it was so weird. So manumission, for anybody that didn't know, it wasn't really about the music that was playing. It wasn't really about the DJ. It was more about the shows. They would do like sex shows. They would just do very random kind of like, I don't know what to kind of call it, but it was just very weird.
It was theatre.
Yeah,
it was theatre.
Totally.
It was a stage show set to music.
Totally. And when somebody would come on to the stage, Mike and, is it Sarah? Claire. Mike and Claire would kind of introduce them, and the music would kind of come down a little bit so everyone can turn around and watch the show whilst it's kind of going on. But they were short of like some workers one night, and they asked me to wear some like sweatpants, take my top off, and peel carrots in the crowd. So I was walking around peeling carrots in the crowd and then giving popcorn out as well. Just
kind of the highlight of your Ibiza experience, really.
Things you do in it. Things you do.
Yeah, that's true. And there were some weird shows there. I mean, I kind of stopped going to manumission around the end of the 90s, believe it or not, because although it did carry on for quite a while after that, to me, because my first year in Ibiza was 94, back when I was young, and I used to go to parties because I wanted to go to the party.
Yeah.
I mean, eventually Ibiza became all about work. Yeah. And, you wouldn't go to a party on your night off. No. You'd sit in with a DVD and a takeaway pizza. That's how you did a night off in Ibiza when you were a worker. You just didn't go out. But I remember some of the parties from the 90s, and they were just, Privilege is this enormous hangar of a club anyway. It's not really a nightclub. It was just a space that used to be open air that they had to put a roof on when all the new sound regulations came in. So it was just a massive, massive area with a pool, with a full-size pool in the middle of it. And trees growing everywhere as well. It was just an experience of a night that you couldn't get anywhere else in the world at that time. And so, when they started doing these kind of spectacular shows as well, it was just an experience that you couldn't miss. And they also opened up their own hotel called the Manumission Hotel as well, which I think was around about 97, 98, which was where, people would go after the show, people who'd been invited. And that was a whole sort of new experience, just a different level. Because by the time you got to the Manumission show, you'd been, doing kind of whatever substance or alcohol or whatever the hell you'd been into. And you turned up at this hotel, which was in the middle of nowhere. And then, you'd stay there till 10, 11, 12, 1 o'clock the following morning, get back to wherever you were living and think, what the hell did I just do for the last 24 hours?
Yeah.
It was a real out-of-body experience, the whole thing.
Yeah, I've heard some stories from those times, and you're just like, you wouldn't be able to get away with it nowadays, I don't think.
No, definitely not. No, I mean, just on so many levels, the kind of, I can't really go into too much about it on a podcast. correct, but so many levels it was wrong,
Yeah.
but it was right at the same time.
It's strange how times change, isn't it, as well, and how I don't want to say corporate, but how kind of things change. Because even when I first started going to Ibiza, you'd always get the back in the day people that'd be like, back in the day we used to do this, and back in the day we used to do that. Even like when I became resident in Kenya, like the residents before me were like, yeah, years ago this was like the place to go. This was like the Cafe Mambo of the time, and everyone would party there. But things change, and kind of people move on, I guess. And I guess there comes a point when money gets involved and people are like, okay, we can really make money out of this. And it kind of takes it away from what it originally was. Because with what happened with We Love Sundays, like, was it just came to an end? I can't really remember.
I think ultimately it just the whole vibe of the island sort of changed.
Yeah, it did.
And like a lot of things that happen in entertainment and the kind of showbiz industry, is that everything has its day, everything has its peak.
Totally.
And the great thing about entertainment and everything from movies to theatre to the what they call the nighttime industry now is very much constantly evolving, and so nothing really stays the same. So things peak out, so it kind of goes up, reaches its peak, and then it kind of comes down, and other things take over. And I think ultimately with We Love and with Space in general, it was actually the termination of the lease at the club.
Yeah,
everybody knew that Space was going to go. Everybody knew that it was going to change, but the music changed as well. We Love had a philosophy for many years that they wouldn't introduce a VIP area.
Yeah,
their philosophy was that music and what they did was for everybody. It should be no segregation. But in the last year or the last 2 years, even they introduced a VIP area because of pressure from the club.
Yeah.
And I think that all started to kill it. But the other thing, of course, was that other events were starting as well. You had this new kid on the block just opposite called Ushuaia, which was a daytime party venue. And what happened with Ibiza is that over a period of, I'd say, probably about 5 years, is that everything went from being inside at nighttime to going outside during the daytime. And that's why we used to talk about the Instagram generation, the influence that social media had on clubbing was enormous.
Yeah.
People like me who were working there and could see it happening. What we could see was that the amount of people going to clubs at night was diminishing.
Yeah.
And the people going to daytime parties and villa parties and things that were a bit smaller and more exclusive was increasing.
Yeah.
People wanted to take pictures of themselves stood by a pool with a bottle of champagne or with a bottle of vodka with their friends in the daytime, looking great, looking toned, or just looking like they're enjoying themselves. When you take a picture in the nightclub, you're probably taking a picture at you looking your worst ever.
Two pills in, gurning away.
That's
it's
right,
game over. Yeah.
And those pictures are great when they're private and shared between your friends. But when they start going around, it sort of just I think it had the effect that people would sort of say, well, we've done that.
Yeah.
We've done the nightclubs. We want to do something new now, because even social media and Instagram and Twitter and TikTok now, all these things, they constantly evolve, but they evolve at a far, far quicker rate than anything previously. So once you've done your nightclub, you want to go and do something else. Yeah. So with Sundays, it basically, in the end, it became a competition between things like We Love and Avicii.
Yeah.
And the EDM side of things, I say EDM. It was what people started to call this new sound that people like Swedish House Mafia had been developing. This kind of, some call it cheesy, some people call it more commercial. I mean, to be honest, I liked a lot of it, but it was a different sound, and it worked better in a spectacular setting, something with lots of pyrotechnics, something with a big presence, and it worked better in the daytime. Yeah. And so what started to happen was that people started to shun the whole kind of drugs, doing 22 hours in a nightclub, all that sort of stuff, in favor of champagne, in favor of VIP tables, in favor of star spotting, in favor of, this is where the celebrities hang out. That all started to happen around about 2012, 2013, and then evolved into where we are now. So it was kind of a natural termination. There was nothing that really said, we've got to stop.
Yeah.
It was just that they had their day. It lasted 10 years. It was a great decade at the top.
Yeah.
And things moved on.
No, definitely. And change is good. I think Ushuaia did completely change the game in Ibiza.
Definitely.
Just how
definitely.
like how they kind of amalgamated an extremely high-end hotel with an amazing venue, day party. And there was just something about it. I think their branding with their Ants party as well kind of made things extreme. Like, I remember when Ants first came out and it was everywhere. Like, you couldn't get away from it. They were everywhere. And I think what they did was they just built this amazing venue. Did they have the massive stage to start with?
Yeah, I mean, I worked with Ushuaia very closely when they first started. I was one of the first consultants to work there.
Yeah.
To set things up, and in fact, they offered me a job there. But as you and I know, after many years in this industry, your hearing starts to get a little bit screwed up, and I didn't want any more work at the front line. At that point, I was starting to sort of think I need to kind of look after my health a little bit, because I was from the generation of people who used to go and stand by the speaker, for hours on end. Nowadays people wear earplugs in DJ booths and think, we just didn't do that. And so I got fairly conscious of having to make sure that, things didn't go wrong. But what Ushuaia did, I remember their first big event was with David Morales, was with Usher, and was Idris Elba.
Yeah.
Idris Elba, who had been a DJ before he was famous in South London, was starting to sort of DJ professionally.
Yeah.
And the management company that set up this first event, Idris was one of their first signings.
Okay.
And at that time, this was about 2011, 2012, he was only known for The Wire at that point. His career hadn't gone stratospheric. And I even remember, the guy from the management company saying the first on's going to be this guy called Idris Elba. And I was like, who's that? Who's that? And they were saying, did you ever watch The Wire? I was like, no, I never. I was one of those people, like many, who didn't watch The Wire until about 10 years after it was made.
I still haven't watched it.
Oh, it's amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's great. It's fantastic. So anyway, we did this event, and I remember going to Ushuaia for the first time. The venue had been open for about 2 weeks, and this was their first big event, and it was Ushuaia and David Guetta. And do you remember they did that track, Without You? It was called Without You, wasn't it?
Who did that?
Without You. Ushuaia was the singer on it.
Oh,
and David
yeah.
Guetta, the producer. I mean, it was a very commercial track.
Yeah.
But this was the first performance of it. And I remember going to Ushuaia, and they had this big stage, and it had the set was made up of if you go into a bedroom and a bathroom, and there's like a sort of a bathtub.
Yeah, I remember this. I remember
a sort of not attached to the wall, but sort of one of I can't remember what they're called, but like a U-shaped bathtub.
Yeah.
And this was in the centre of the stage, and this was their DJ booth. And I remember looking at it going, you've got to get rid of that. I mean, that's ridiculous. And they're going, oh, we've spent a fortune on it. I was going, no, you can't have DJs, sort of DJing from a bathtub on a stage. And the reason they put it in was because, it was a hotel.
Yeah.
And I think at that point, they hadn't realised quite how spectacular that venue could be.
Yeah.
So we took the bathtub up and brought in a whole load of extra staging and turned it into a stage. And I can remember the guys there thinking, we need to move in a different direction here and sort of, and make this sort of much more of a venue with a hotel rather than a hotel with a venue. And from there, it really moved on. But the great advantage that Ushuaia had, apart from the fact that everybody there was so professional, because in Ibiza, you work with a lot of people who are not professional.
Yeah.
They might turn up, they might not.
Yeah.
So if you're trying to run a gig and you want a driver to pick up a DJ, or you want a sound technician to operate the panel, or you want an electrician to switch everything on, you're never guaranteed they were going to turn up. This was back in the day. So it was a nightmare of a place to work.
Yeah.
That's why it was the first professional venue where everybody kind of turned up on time. Everybody had a standard that was kind of, proper gig event standard. So these guys kind of knew what they were doing. And the other thing was they had a lot of money. Yeah. They had a pot of money and investment. And when you've got all those things nicely combined, you've got the money, you've got the staff, and you've got the vision, then you know it's going to happen. And they changed the face of clubbing for sure.
They did massively, and they still are, to be fair.
Yeah.
And then obviously they bought High a couple of years ago, or they bought Space and turned it into High, which is an amazing club. Was it an Ushuaia party or was it an Eden party? I remember calling you one day and I was like, how's your day going, mate? And he's like, oh, mate, trying to explain that you can't spray champagne over fucking decks is an absolute nightmare to a load of tour managers. And I'm just like, who the hell were you dealing with that night? I remember we'd always talk about like DJ riders at the time. And I think you were doing a party at Eden. Was it the Ibiza Rocks one where people was it Steve Aoki?
Yeah.
Was it Steve Aoki when he first got big and he wanted to like spray champagne over everyone, get a load of cake and throw it into the crowd and I remember
inflatable dinghies. I remember inflatable dinghies and stuff like this, And it was all part of the act. I get it. I completely understand why people want these things. They have a vision, and whether it's stupid or not, you have to try and help sort of put this vision together, or at least say that's not a good idea in this venue, you really shouldn't do it. And I do remember at that party, it was called Reclaim the Dance Floor. I mentioned it earlier, and it was one of these things where they were kind of ahead of their time, but I in some cases, I mean, Steve Aoki, believe it or not, at that time was the 6 a.m. DJ, and the club closed at 6:30.
Yeah,
he was very, very low down the batting order at that time, and so my job as an event manager is to always try and help the headliners, and then try and help the number twos, and then try and help the number three, and then you kind of think, I'm going to run out of money now. I can't really do much. So here was this guy who was booked to come on at 6 a.m. for 30 minutes, wanted to spray champagne, wanted, dinghies so he could float over the crowd. And I was trying to say to his tour manager, you'll have about 100 people in the venue at 6 a.m. Most people will have gone home. You can't do it. And he's like, no, it's very important. We need to do it. So I get it. I totally understand why they want to do it. But sometimes you do end up in these situations where the vision of the artist just doesn't mix with the venue.
Yeah.
If they're doing a festival, totally get it, totally understand it, because there's a crowd there ready to watch somebody else. But if you're at the end of the night, in Ibiza particularly, where everybody does get exhausted by the time you get to 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, because they've been up all day as well, and they're on a 7-day holiday, and or they were back then, and people just get tired. So you can do it. But I think just going back to sort of nightmare riders and things like that. Back in 2009, part of Pete Tong's night, we put on Lady Gaga. We had Lady Gaga for the night, which was an incredible coup to do this. And I spoke to their tour people, and they were quite easy to work with, but they had one specific requirement, which was a dry ice machine for when she started the show.
This fucking dry ice machine. This dry ice machine, literally. Oh, we lost Tom. We're back recording. So, dry ice machine. I literally remember this. I remember this. You trying to find a dry ice machine on Ibiza. Can you hear me?
Yeah, that's right. And and this is a real crucial part of their performance. They wouldn't start, or they wouldn't do it without the dry ice machine. And when you're on an island like Ibiza, if you need something for a production, it's not like you can just call a hire company, down the road and say, we need to hire something. You're kind of, something like that. You have to physically get it to the island if there isn't one on the island. Anyway, long story short, we found that Amnesia unbelievably had a dry ice machine that they'd not used for about 5 years, and was in storage at Amnesia. So I managed to get a crew of people to go down to Amnesia, put it in the back of a pickup truck and bring it over. And like I say, I mean, Lady Gaga's people were like, it's not going ahead unless we've got this dry ice machine. And they were 100%. They weren't bluffing. And, I think Eden had sold like 5,000 tickets. Yeah. So, and I'm telling you, this was like about 6 o'clock in the afternoon of the evening of the gig. So then we got the dry ice machine there, got it into the club. And these things are heavy. It takes 4 people to lift these things. So the crew got it in. And then I was telling you before about how Ibiza can be quite flaky. The electrician at the club refused to come in and connect it because he hadn't been told about it.
He was the worst. He never turned up.
That's right.
That guy never turned up.
And I can remember having to get the owner of the venue, having to sort of, go round to his house, which was at the back of the venue, banging on the gates because he wouldn't let him in. And this was 11:30 now. And the club was opening at midnight. And in the end, the owner got him to come in. I think he threatened to kill him or something. I think it was really that quite serious, and they got it connected. But I remember when the gig happened, the 3-phase cabling to power the thing was still in the club. So that there was no time to kind of reroute the cable or anything like that. So I had to get 2 or 3 security guys to kind of stand by this cable and make sure nobody tripped over it. It was just an absolute nightmare. And that was one of the things about Ibiza back in the day. And like I say, back in the day, 10 years, not that long ago, that could have been really difficult, and goes back to why Ushuaia was a turning point, because it wasn't just, the concept of the venue. It was the professionalism of the staff as well that really raised the bar. So, yeah.
Yeah, because James Dutton, he works for them, or started working for them, didn't he? And kind of worked for the whole
thing. Yeah, that's right. Well, James became sort of your sort of replacement, I think.
Yeah,
James,
he did,
I think, sort of worked with me the year after. And I had James work with me on a few gigs for the BBC, and also at Ushuaia as well. And I remember when Ushuaia asked me about sort of, going to work for them full time, I've already recounted the story. I didn't want to do it. They were looking for people. And I said, you should talk to James, because James, he's this young producer guy who's pretty technically savvy as well. Yeah. And you should get him on board, And I don't know if it was that year, but certainly the year after, they got him on board as well, which was a smart move for them. Good move for James as well.
Definitely. So let's talk about the BBC. Where did it all start?
BBC. Well, I mean, I started with the BBC, as I mentioned earlier, as an engineer, technical engineer. So, with a soldering iron and components and stripping things down and stuff like that. But I realised after a couple of years, it wasn't really what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a producer. I wanted to work in music and stuff. So I tried desperately to get myself over to the more producing side. Yeah. But what I found after a while was that having the technical knowledge as well was really useful. And it pushed me in the direction of doing events and outside broadcast, because they are very technically demanding. Because it's not like walking into a studio where you switch the button on and everything works.
Yeah.
With an outside broadcast or an event, you are basically building a broadcast studio facility in some of the most difficult circumstances, which is where you really need to have that kind of technical nous as well.
Yeah.
So when you're producing those events, having some degree of technical knowledge really helps you, and means that you know whether an event is really viable or not.
Yeah.
So I kind of moved into doing events with the BBC. And I used to do events around London to start with. And they were quite big events. They used to be called Soul Night Out. I'm going back to the 80s now. And we would do 2,000 capacity venues, turn them into a broadcast event, and broadcast them on the radio station, which was the local radio station for London. So from there, I kind of moved into doing events full time. And then after that, I worked with Kiss. We'll come back to Kiss because we're talking BBC. And at the end of the 90s, I went back to the BBC and started working on a thing called the Radio 1 Dance Party, which is where they used to take their old BBC One roadshow. They used to have this thing called the Radio 1 Roadshow that used to kind of go around the country in caravans, basically, and set up in parks and town centres and do a show to maybe 3,000 or 4,000 people. In the 90s, they had these big articulated lorries, which really were fantastic with sort of like fold out stages and stuff like that. But they were still colloquial, parochial is the word I'm looking for. They were still a bit small, and they were targeting sort of, daytime listeners. Yeah. Well, myself and a guy called Dave Pearce, who I worked with for a lot of years with Dave, we put this proposal to the BBC to turn it into a Friday night dance party. Yeah. So when the roadshow used to run Monday to Friday, so we would do Monday to Friday doing the lunchtime Radio 1 show. But we sort of said on Friday night, why don't you do something for your kind of clubby listeners, because club music at the end of the 90s was starting to become mainstream chart music. Why don't you do something on Friday nights for your club audience, which is also your target audience, but you're not doing anything for them. So the BBC were quite hesitant because, the BBC being the BBC, were all about, aren't people going to take drugs and all that sort of stuff? I'm like, no. We won't do anything like that. Most of the people that come to a Friday night event will be university students or people who've finished for the weekend. Yeah. This can be kind of like, your weekend starts here, Friday night, big Friday night out. So we persuaded them it'd be a good idea. So what we had to do was to basically completely rebrand the roadshow on a Friday night. So same stage, same vehicles, but we used to hire in a big sound system and some lights and a bit of staging to go on there as well, and basically turn it into a proper pumping event, like a proper stage show. And the first one we did was in Bournemouth, on the beach in Bournemouth back in '96. And I can remember setting it up, and it was phenomenally successful. Probably around about 15,000 people came. They were all lined up along the pier, which was overlooking where we were on the beach. And it was amazing. I think we had Tall Paul and maybe Seb Fontaine, maybe Judge Jules playing. And these were all huge DJs at the time. Yeah. And at the end of the night, we thought it had gone great. We used to do an after party. So me and Dave would leave the venue as soon as it was all finished and go to the after party. Anyway, it turned out that night that a lot of students had sort of decided that because it had gone a bit cold, they were going to break up a few deck chairs and light little bonfires on the beach to get warm. The police completely misinterpreted this as being a bit of a riot going on, and they all turned up in their riot gear and stuff like that. And I remember getting because I was the on-site sort of production manager, I remember getting a phone call around 6 a.m. in the morning. I was driving back to London at 6 a.m. And I got a phone call from the duty office at the BBC saying there are reports going out on a local radio station called 2CR, which was like the commercial radio station for Bournemouth, saying there was a big riot in Bournemouth last night following a BBC event. And I was like, there's no riot. It was there was a lot of people, but there was no riot. And anyway, eventually it turned out that it was these students had made a couple of deck chairs. So the gig almost got cancelled after its first one. But anyway, we managed to persuade the bosses at Radio 1 that it wasn't a riot. They accepted it wasn't. It was an overreaction. And it carried on. And I remember some of those events. There was one we did at Brighton with Paul Oakenfold. They estimated 50,000 people on the beach. I mean, These were huge events, all free, but they were massive. And so from there, I started to work a bit more with the BBC in Ibiza. Having been involved in their first broadcast, which was in '95, I kind of got re-engaged with them. And so from there, because I was based in Ibiza every year, I used to live in Ibiza, the BBC used to use me as their person in Ibiza because I understood the way the BBC works, which is quite unique in the way that they work with broadcasts, and everything from health and safety to production standards to making sure that the experience is good for their listeners and all that sort of stuff. So they needed somebody that got all that, but could still work with the Ibiza club community, which didn't get all that. They wouldn't understand all that side of it. So that's kind of how I got involved with the BBC and stuck with them right through until present day.
So when did you first start doing the Ibiza, the BBC in Ibiza at Mambo? Because was Mambo the first place they would do their shows from, or was there another venue?
Yeah, the first one was in '95, which was actually at Café Del Mar.
Yeah,
next door, believe it or not. And one of the reasons that Mambo got involved, I'll try and shorten this story a little bit, but it's relevant to the question. But the first broadcast off the island of Ibiza was in 1994 with Kiss FM, which was a commercial London station. And because they could get advertising and stuff, I can still remember the advertiser was Brute Aquatonic, which was like a splash on body scent for men.
Yeah, I've never heard of it.
It was like they wanted to sort of get into Ibiza. They saw the Ibiza crowd as very much their target marketing crowd. So they put a lot of money into trying to get a live show from Ibiza. And this was back before, the internet. The internet was around, but it was geeky people who were using the internet. It was tiny, and it certainly wasn't the capacity it was now. So getting a signal for a radio broadcast out of Ibiza was only possible by satellite. So it was kind of expensive to do it. And I was working with Kiss then on all their events and concerts. So what we did, we shipped over a satellite system, but we also took 500 listeners with us as well, because we were a bit sort of concerned about crowds, and we decided that it would be a good idea to take out 500 listeners as well as part of a Kiss and Ibiza holiday.
Yeah.
Very, very ambitious project for the time it was. And we put a load of planning into this thing to make it happen. And what we were going to do was to do it from a beach in the south of the island called Salinas Beach.
Yeah.
And a little beach hut called El Chiringuito. These places now are famous.
Yeah,
they are famous venues. But back then it was literally a beach hut.
Okay.
With a lovely beach in front of it. We did all these things. We had to liaise with the aerospace people, because it was very close to the airport. We were using a satellite. They didn't want planes to have their signals interfered with. So massive amount of planning, and the idea was to take 500 listeners down to this beach venue on a Friday, on a day that they weren't busy, because they only got busy on Saturdays.
Yeah.
And make this show happen. So long story short, Thursday night, we had this September rain, which we never knew about. In September, Ibiza goes from summer into the rainy season, and the rain can be tropical. It can be absolutely torrential. So Thursday night, the day before the broadcast, we had this torrential storm, and it was going to carry on into Friday. Friday was written off. So we were left with a situation with all this planning, all this money put into it, a beach that we couldn't use, and a 3-hour lunchtime show just 12 hours away from us. And we were sat in Cafe Mambo. We were discussing it in Cafe Mambo because all the Kiss, all the bigwigs were out.
Yeah.
And they were basically pointing the finger at me and saying, what can we do? What can we do? There's got to be a solution. And I'm like, I can't, I'm good, but I can't change the weather. There's nothing I can do about the weather. So we will have to change the venue. And so they're like, well, okay, all right, we'll change the venue. Let's change the venue. Let's make a decision. And because I'd been eating at Cafe Mambo all week, my hotel was just around the corner. I'd got to know the owner, Javier, quite well.
Yeah.
And I went to see Javier and sort of said, I'm looking for a venue to do a live radio show tomorrow. I can't really think of anywhere. You've got a great venue here. You've got an outside terrace that's got covers on it. can we do it in your DJ booth tomorrow? I think we can make it work. And I had to get the satellite crew to come down, check the signal was going to work and all that sort of stuff on the Thursday night. And it did. So the first ever show basically came from Mambo because of a thunderstorm. And that's why Mambo got the reputation of being the host venue. But when Radio 1 came out in 95, they didn't want to do it from the same venue as Kiss, because Kiss and Radio 1 were big rivals back then. And so they decided to do next door, Café Del Mar, which had more of a history than Mambo, because Mambo only opened in 94. So I started working with them back then. Radio 1 then started to use venues all over the island. And they did avoid Cafe Mambo for quite a while, because Kiss came back year after year to do stuff from Mambo. But eventually in the late 90s, Radio 1 did a show from Cafe Mambo, because Kiss had stopped going to Mambo. And then they started talking about having a facility there. Yeah. And then the studio was made. It was basically built on a couple of tables to start. I wasn't involved at that stage. I was doing other stuff then. And then in, I think, 2003, a proper radio studio was installed at Cafe Mambo. And I used to be a presenter in Australia. I was living in Australia at the time, in the winter, the European winter. And I used that studio to do my show. Yeah. Because I knew Javier quite well, obviously. And the guy that was running the studio at that time decided he'd had enough. He was going back to the UK. So the studio had no studio manager. So I spoke to Javier and sort of said, I could do this part-time, because the studio's not in use all the time. Yeah. I know what I'm doing in a radio studio. Why don't I take over the studio? And then I started working with Radio 1 to come in more to the studio. And that's kind of where it all grew from.
That's amazing, man. Because you've been in radio for years, right? Like,
yeah. Like, you sound like I'm 100.
Like when you were at Radio London, was it Radio London before it was the BBC?
Yeah, no, it was the BBC. It was like the BBC have a load of local radio stations all over the UK, and they have one in London, believe it or not. And so, although my career started at Broadcasting House, which is where all the networks come from and the main HQ, I wanted to move to Radio London. One, because it was a pay rise. And secondly, because as an engineer, if I wanted to get into programming, my chances of doing that in the big corporate HQ was zero. But if I moved to a smaller, leaner operation where people were kind of multitasking and doing lots of other things, then my chances of doing it were much greater. So I tried very hard to make that move. And a lot of people wanted to do that. You had to sit interviews and, go through board processes to get the job. But anyway, eventually I managed to get the job. So yeah, Radio London. And that was like, in the mid 80s.
So was Pete Tong at Radio London then?
Pete Tong was at Radio London for around about 9 months or a year, something like that. This was 1987. Yeah. I went from being an engineer to a producer to a program manager, and I was given a strand of programs to look after, which was at nighttime. Yeah. And we branded it. It was called Night FM. And it was an operation that was a bit naughty in the BBC, to be perfectly honest, because it was a commercial operation. Yeah. But it was a very sneaky, very quiet commercial operation that was within the guidelines of the BBC, but not in the spirit of the the BBC charter, really. And what we were doing was that because we'd seen a growth as music people, we'd seen a growth in people wanting to go to venues and go to entertainment and not just listen to the radio. Through the Soul Night Out, which I mentioned earlier, we knew that although our audience ratings using the book, when you do audience surveys, was not that huge, we had a massive following of people who listened to Radio London for the specialist music. We were playing soul, jazz, funk, what was called black music at the time, believe it or not. We were playing acid jazz. We were playing kind of, new bands, London bands and stuff, when London was the real epicenter of live music. We were playing all that stuff. Radio 1 was playing kind of commercial chart music, which, you know, is what they were there to do. But they were avoiding a lot of other music too, which we were playing. And if you kind of think back, you weren't alive. What am I saying? Think back. But if you look back at the history of that time, around the mid-'80s, electronic music started to cut through, and black music, as it was called, started to cut through. So you had artists like Loose Ends, Luther Vandross, Phyllis Nelson, Paul Hardcastle, who were all breaking through. Radio 1 was not playing these artists, but Radio London was. And so we were breaking this music. We were absolutely breaking this music through. So we developed this particular niche of music that also had a very good live element with it too. So the commercial operation that we hit upon was that we could put on events, and the revenue that we would generate from the events would fund the specialist strands of music that we were doing, because the funding wasn't coming from the BBC internally.
Okay.
So although it was legitimate in its way, it wasn't, because we weren't taking advertising. We weren't doing anything commercial. We were, if you like, marketing our own events. And then the thing that was a little bit dodgy is that we were putting up the risk money to put the event on.
Okay.
And you shouldn't really be doing that with money that's there to make programs. That was the risky element of it. Interestingly, now that's what they're looking at as the future of the BBC. So we were just way ahead of our time. That's
always been ahead.
That's how it was. And so we started putting on events. So my job was to look for people who could not only do a radio show, but could also do an event. So we had a Friday night slot that was really going to be based around house music, which was kind of starting because of Chicago. And, you know, those early days of Chicago house. And Pete was one of the main people. Pete was working for London Records. I got to know Pete through a guy called Jeff Young, and Jeff was also at London. He was a music guy, but he used to do a fill-in show for a guy called Robbie Vincent. Now, Robbie Vincent was a phone-in host, but he also had this great knowledge of jazz funk music. So he used to do a Saturday show on Radio London for about 2 hours that had a massive following. And so through this kind of London soul connection, it was called the London Soul Mafia back in the day, we found Pete. And Pete was on a Kent radio station called Medway. So I approached his management and sort of said, we're looking at doing this strand. It'd be great if Pete could get involved. And so Pete came to the BBC. That was his first time at the BBC back in 87. We also signed Giles Peterson back then as well. Giles I got to know through a record label called Street Sounds. Giles was compiling these albums called Acid Jazz. And so he was perfect, because what both Pete was doing and what Giles were doing translated into DJ-led events. And so for me, as a manager, putting on a DJ was a lot cheaper than putting on a band.
Definitely.
And that's kind of how it started. You know, that, you know, I could put on an event then, get these guys to front it. They would book the guests as well. And we have, you know, people coming to the event without all the hassle of trying to put on live performances. So that's how Pete got involved. He stayed for about 9 or 10 months and then went to a rival station in London called Capital. And I kind of totally understand why he did that, because Capital was the big commercial station, a lot of funding, higher profile and stuff. But Pete was with us. Pete was involved. And we did, you know, I mean, some of the music that we played at that time was so cutting edge and way ahead of its time. You know, that was the kind of David Morales, Frankie Knuckles era. You know, it was fresh music coming straight out of Chicago that we were bringing to London. And that's kind of how the London acid house, acid jazz scene started. We were using, you know, a lot of the DJs around London that were playing that music then. So Nicky Holloway, what Nicky was doing then, it was a great era, fantastic era.
It's wild to
way
think.
Ahead of it.
It's really wild to think. Is like to think that you, like, what does it feel like knowing that you were literally there at the beginning of what radio is now?
Yeah, well, when you're living it, you don't realise.
No, you don't.
We were all we were all young, I mean, I was working with Dave Pearce back then. Dave was another, Dave was a hip hop DJ back then. We were doing a lot of stuff out in New York then.
Mm-hmm.
So we were in New York more than we were in London. We spent a lot of time in New York, and we were talking to Sleeping Bag Records, Def Jam, all the people that were kind of breaking new music there. So you Run DMCs, Eric B and Rakim, LL Cool J,
Rick Rubin,
Dougie Fresh, Beastie Boys, all that kind of stuff that was happening then, we were playing on our station. So at the time, you don't realize that you're breaking stuff. Our motivation was always to just break new music and make the gigs happen.
Yeah.
Because it was very important that the gigs worked. And we also wanted to kind of stick it to Radio 1 a bit as well, because, Radio 1 were very aloof at that time in their ivory tower. Radio 1 really was going through a phase of being quite elite in the way, in the way that it worked and the close relationship it had with the music industry back then. They were ignoring all this music.
Yeah.
Yet and I get it, because London is like a different country to the rest of the UK.
Totally,
It's kind of almost a state unto itself. So what was happening musically in London was not what Radio 1 were doing.
Yeah.
Radio 1 were broadcasting to the nation. And so people who were in the shires and in the towns still wanted to hear pop.
Yeah.
They still wanted to hear that kind of pop music, Simon Bates, Gary Davis, cheesy style of radio, which is not what we were. And it wasn't what London was. We were doing something completely different. So we didn't know. Looking back on it, God, they were amazing times. They were, absolutely incredible. We were very lucky to be given the chance, because we had quite a maverick manager at the radio station, who, again, he also wanted to stick it to Radio 1 too. In fact, he wanted to stick it to the BBC. So he was fantastic. He was a guy who was tipped to be a director general. He was a very high up guy, but through a series of mess ups when he was in news and current affairs, he was a very serious news and current affairs guy who was the manager at Radio London, but he was also quite a maverick. And anyway, he ended up being demoted from being the head of news and current affairs for the BBC to being the manager of Radio London. They wanted to get him out of the way, put him to the side. But in putting him there, they put in a guy who didn't care.
Yeah.
He had no worry about kind of skimming around the BBC charter to do things. And he had no worry about the manager of Radio 1 ringing Radio London up saying, you're not supposed to be playing this music. That's our, he would just tell them to sod off, just go away. Let the guys do it, And so we were given a lot of creative freedom to do what we did. And it just shows that sometimes, you need to work outside of the guidelines, to find something new. So we were very lucky. Unfortunately, the station eventually got closed down.
Yeah.
And I think our operation was part of the reason that it happened. But, we survived, I think, 2.5 years and brought a lot of new music. And certainly we changed Radio 1.
Definitely.
Because what happened was the people that were involved in Radio London, a lot of them went to KISS, which started in 1990. Night FM and Radio London got closed down in late 88. So there was a kind of a year's hiatus where none of us had any work. I went into television. I actually went to television. I sort of thought, that's it. It's all over for radio.
Yeah.
So for a full year, I left the business. In fact, nearly 2 years, because KISS didn't come on till September 90. And then when KISS came on, I kind of went back into it. And then a lot of those guys that went to KISS ended up at Radio 1 in 1994, when they had what they called the Night of the Long Knives, when a lot of people at Radio 1 were sacked. And this whole new generation of DJs came in. And so the roots of Radio 1 taking over dance go back to Radio London. That's kind of where the seeds were planted. But it took 10 years to get through to network.
And now Radio 1 are literally at the forefront of pushing music from all cultures. It's kind of amazing what they do now.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I personally, I still think they miss quite a bit as well.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you know me, Will. I like trance and I like that kind of melodic dance music. Everyone now is going, what? But I like all of it. I like my techno. I like a lot of music, but trance has always been my thing. And whenever you see anything to do with Radio 1, they just avoid that genre because they see it as being quite cheesy. A lot of people do. But I don't think that's a reason to sort of completely avoid something that has, usually the top DJs in the world.
Oh, trance DJs.
Back in the day used to all be Tiestos, your Van Dykes, your Armin van Buren's. Not so much now, although Tiesto, of course, changed his sound and stuff like that. But they were ignoring it. So that was my little gripe with Radio 1.
Yeah.
That there were certain areas. I think their all-time biggest essential mix was Above and Beyond.
Yeah.
And you kind of do think, don't you see it? Don't you see it that there is other stuff out there as well?
Above and Beyond are still huge.
Yeah.
Like huge on another level.
But huge in a very quiet way.
Yeah, it's strange because they can still, like, they do a lot of touring in America and they sell an insane amount of tickets, and you don't really hear about it. It's just there. But I've always said that about trance. Is trance fans are so dedicated. If you have have a following in trance, they're gonna be with you until they're dead. Like, they're literally there their whole life. But it's a little different in house and techno. It's a little bit more like clickier. People grow out of it. People aren't into it so much. People stop listening to it. Definitely. It's like you have like that 18 to 27-year-old, and then you're like, after that, everyone's having kids and getting married and buying houses and not listening to house or techno. And trance, they're still turning up.
Yep.
I'll never forget the Cream nights when we used to record the podcast.
No, well, that's right. I mean, I worked on those Cream nights, as you know. I was very involved with Cream for around about 10 years. And, I remember 2003 with Cream in Ibiza. And every night for 16 weeks, it was Tiesto and Van Dyke.
Yeah.
And they were the two biggest DJs in the world at the time. And I remember sort of working on this event. And I only worked on that event because, I knew the promoter of it very well.
Yeah.
And I loved the music. And they needed somebody to run the venue because the promoter wanted to be on the door all the night. He didn't want to be inside.
How is Mo?
Keep his eye on the door all night. That was Mo.
Yeah, how is he?
Have
you spoke to him recently? Have you spoke to Mo recently?
Is what? Sorry.
Have you spoke to Mo recently?
Oh, mate, you didn't hear? He died.
No,
he died sadly, unfortunately. Yes, he did. Yeah, probably about 4 years ago now. Yeah, but he died in a swimming accident.
I did not know.
Sorry to break the news, but yeah, it was about 4 years ago, and he was on holiday in it was either India or it would have been Pakistan with his kids, and he got caught by a wave and blown onto some rocks.
Jeez.
Hit his head, and that was it.
I did not know that.
Very, very sad. I miss him greatly. I miss him greatly because we worked together and were great mates as well for a long time, and he was a real character on the island as well. I mean, huge loss. But yeah, I mean, going back to back to in the day, he put on some great parties for Cream, and they were trance parties. But I mean, I just have to say as well, but the atmosphere in those parties was better than any other event that I'd been to, and a lot of it was to do with the energy. I think the uplifting feel of the music, that was always what I used to sort of say was the difference between, a lot of house, techno, tech house, and trance. Trance was meant to make you feel high.
Yeah.
It was meant to make you feel good. The musical structure of the chordal progressions and everything was euphoric. The idea was to take the plane into a liftoff mode, not to just keep it running flat all the time and varying its speed a bit, and so the atmosphere was unrivaled, and so I miss those nights. And I miss the feel, and of course trance, like a lot of other music, goes in and out of fashion.
Yeah,
and it's interesting because when we were talking about EDM and the rise of the Guetta and the Swedes and all that sort of stuff. When you look at the musical structure of a lot of EDM music, it is trance.
It's the same.
They are trance
Yeah,
chords, just done with different sounds, in a different time signature and with a different beat, and with a lot more emphasis on the kick, on the bass drops. I get all that, but the euphoria of that music is trance.
It's still trance,
without question.
It's kind of coming back popular again. It's more like people don't want to call it trance though. They want to call it like progressive house or progressive techno.
Yeah.
They don't want to call it trance. But let's be honest, it's still fucking trance at the end of the day.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, completely. Yeah, of course it is, and it is coming back. You're right. I mean, a lot of trance producers just couldn't afford to carry on.
No.
Because nobody was downloading the music. The gigs weren't being put on. And so a lot of those kind of Dutch and Belgian, middle order producers, they went back to, working in a brewery or taxi driving because they just couldn't sustain the music. Yet when you listen to some of the music they were producing, it was amazing.
Yeah.
In my eye.
Amnesia as a club. Definitely. Amnesia as a club was so good for that. Like Cream was such a good night back in the day then. Like when it was more about the main room rather than the terrace. It was Amnesia when it was built with the big platform and it was just perfect for trance. It was like that perfect kind of relationship between music and club and people. Like the DJ was high up, like you'd be looking down onto the crowd. The lasers were amazing. Amnesia was just that club that would just, you wouldn't get that anywhere else in the world. I don't think even on Ibiza there wasn't any other clubs that could give you that trance feeling that you would get from Amnesia.
No, not at all. And the sound system was kind of built for it too. I mean, I was talking earlier about the professionalism of people. The one good thing about Amnesia was that it was probably, one of the two professional venues on the island during that era. The other one being Space.
Yeah.
The guys there were great. They understood the music. The owner spent money on the sound system. He understood that the sound system was important. You couldn't just put in a lot of watts and hope for the best.
Yeah.
It had to be right. So they had great sound systems in there, and sometimes they would change them every season.
Oh my God!
They would rip out the old one that would have cost maybe 50 to 100,000 euros and put in a new one.
I just remembered the light guy.
Yeah. I mean, the lighting guys were phenomenal as well.
Yeah.
They understood the music, and they would never leave the lighting board. They would sit at the lighting board all night, and they knew when the liftoff was coming. They knew intuitively when breakdowns were happening. They knew when a track was going to take off. They understood that a DJ would run their set so that it would go up and peak and go down and go up and peak and go down. So they built the lighting structure to follow that, so that things like production effects were not big.
No, not at
back
all.
then.
Not at all.
The biggest thing you got was the Megatron, the dry ice machine, which in Amnesia was massive.
It was huge.
It filled the room within about 5 seconds with CO2, and to fill a room of that size, you needed a lot of pressure and a lot of CO2, and that was about as far as it went. There was no fireworks, there was no pyrotechnics, there was no claps and bangs and stuff like that. It was lighting and the Megatron. That was it, and so you had to work with what you had.
Yeah.
And those guys were fantastic. And they did it every night. I mean, that was the other thing. They did it every single night.
They worked hard.
That's why people only work for 5 months in Ibiza, because you do 7 nights a week for 5 months, so you need a break.
You've also got the prep. You've also got the prep in the day.
Amnesia.
You've also got the prep in the day. I know all the lighting guys.
Sorry, you broke up then.
Sorry. You also had all the prep in the day. Like everyone would forget that each night has different branding. Each night has different things. So people would be setting up in the day. I remember when we used to do recordings, especially in Amnesia, a lot of the time we'd go and set up in the day and then come back the night. So you're working like a lot. You're not just working your like 10 till 6 in the morning. You're working from like 12 in the afternoon, setting up and then going back there, and they're long days. Good fun though.
Yeah, they are. They're very long days. I mean, most clubs in Ibiza used to, their production staff would come in around about 4 or 5 o'clock. 5 o'clock usually, because as you know, there's this kind of siesta time there as well. Not so much nowadays, I'm glad to say, but back then it was sacrosanct. Sort of 2 till 4 was siesta, and nobody worked. Even if there was an emergency situation, nobody would come in. So they used to come in at 5 o'clock and just switch everything on, make sure everything was working, check everything. And then they'd go home again and get a disco nap, as we used to call it. Get a disco nap in before coming in to do midnight till 6. But it's interesting because as time went on, I mean, again, back then, the choice for a DJ was either, are you going to play on SL 1200s or are you going to play on CDs? That was it. Then as time went on, you'd get 5 DJs on the bill, and they all wanted different mixers, and they all wanted different CD players, and so the prep time got bigger and bigger and bigger. So you would have to, you'd have to start doing sound checks, at maybe 1, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So the working days actually got longer as time went on as well. And it's good that we're starting to come towards a kind of more of a standardization again now. Where people sort of say the Pioneer stuff's great, just do that. Use that. And when we're doing broadcasting events, we have to be quite ruthless, because it's like we are not changing the setup halfway through a live broadcast to 10 million people. Definitely it's not happening. No. So you need to use this setup. It's like, oh, I don't really like using it. It's like, well, can you use it or not? And if they can, it's like, well, please use it. Do us a favor, because what's important here is not the 2,000 people in front of you. It's the 10 million people listening, and you have to sort of do a performance that sounds great on radio, not that looks good here. Most people do get it. You get the odd couple that don't, but most people do get it.
Yeah, that's amazing. So last up, let's wrap this one up in a bit. But if your ideal night, I think I know the answer. But ideal night in Ibiza, what's like, if you could go back to that night where you're like, go into the club, what would it be?
Cream amnesia, isn't it? I mean, talking about it. I mean, I used to run a night as well, called Euphoria, which was with Dave Pearce. That was, unashamedly commercial, but with a small C. It wasn't big C commercial. It was based on a series of albums called Euphoria, the Euphoria CD collection, which was all trance, of course. But even though I was working on that and putting these events together for several years, I used to love those events too. Normally, by the time we got to about 4 o'clock in the morning, you could relax and have a drink or two. I mean, we used to get given 100 drinks tickets. That's how great Ibiza was back in the day. They would give you 100 drinks tickets, and the idea was that you would buy artists and contacts some drinks, which you would, but you'd never go through 100. It just wouldn't happen. And a lot of the time, even back then, a lot of the DJs were not drinking that much. They wanted to get the set right and all that sort of stuff. So by 4 o'clock, you'd find you got about 50 drinks tickets on you. So you should be like, and they weren't valid the day after. So you're like, okay, I got to start working on this now, But outside of that, I think my top 3 would probably be Cream in the early noughties, without question. Musically, atmosphere, venue, everything, and no phones. People didn't come there and hold up phones or do anything on phones. They went there purely for the music and the sound system, all those things. Everything was just right. It's like one of those things where the jigsaw puzzle comes together perfectly. So Cream was brilliant. Number 2, I'd probably go back to the 90s and think Manumission in the 90s was just incredible. That was, like you said, it wasn't about the music or the DJs. It was about the show and the experience. And then, no, I'm not going to choose my own events, obviously, for number 3. But I'd sort of say it's kind of a tie. I mean, We Love was amazing. Yeah, it was. I used to, but most of the time with We Love, I was working on it. But if you go back to Space on Sundays, again in the late 90s, before I was working on that event properly, that was an incredible event too, on the Sunset Terrace. That was just, not to be missed. So that would probably be my number 3.
That's amazing. It's really wild, you bringing that up, how, and kind of me thinking that, like, how much Apple changed the club industry.
Yeah.
And how much, like, because you're totally right. You can't, obviously there's clubs that don't allow phones out and things like that, and they try and keep that out, but it's like the first thing people go to. And I don't know if you've seen I don't know if you've seen the Eric Prydz Epic shows, but when you see videos of the shows, all you see is people just like putting their cameras up and filming it, and you're like, can you not see how amazing this is? Why are you looking through this through your phone? Like, just, can you not enjoy it? It's wild. Yeah. But then that goes back to
it is. I mean, it's.
Go on. I think
I think it will change again. I think we're going through a particular era at the moment where people just want to post their life online, and and I get it. I'm not one of those people that sort of say, oh, it was all so much better back in the day, even though it was. But I don't go around saying that. It's just that things they develop, and just and the whole thing about progression is that things change.
Yeah,
it doesn't always change for the good.
Yeah, totally.
That's the thing. And sometimes it's quite cyclic. It can go from a really good place and then cycle into something that's not as good for a while, and then cycle back into something that is good again.
Yeah.
And I think we've cycled into a place that is not so good.
Yeah.
But it will cycle back again, in my opinion. I just think that the times where people went to an event because they loved the music and the atmosphere will come back.
Totally.
I think a lot of the time people go to events now because they want to post it, that they were there.
Yeah.
And the only way that they can prove that they were there is to actually go.
Yeah.
So you do get this situation where, the important thing for people is to get the picture or the video or the Instagram or whatever. And then they will post it and look for likes and look for people saying beautiful things about them and saying, oh, you're so lucky. Oh, it's so great. I think that's what it is now, but I hope it will come back. But in a way, that's up to the DJs to a great extent. They have to start making great music again.
Yeah.
And although some of the stuff that's coming out is okay, it's not like it was where, the pressure was to make great music.
Mate, you sound like my dad.
The pressure now. You've got to get, it's got to get back to, I'm not putting it on the DJs. It's the industry as well. The industry's in a way got to focus on combining these two things, because the phones aren't going away.
No,
they're not going to magically disappear and everything's going to go back to how it was. But somehow the two have to coexist quite nicely, and make it much more about music and atmosphere. I think capturing that atmosphere.
I think what's happened as well is that it's completely like our fault as DJs, is that it never used to truly really be about us. It used to just be about the night. Like nights used to be, it used to be advertised as like a trance night or something like that. You knew, like, if you were going to Cream, you're getting trance. You knew if you're going to We Love, you're going to get everything, but mostly house and techno. But now it's because of social media, it's all like DJs have turned into rock stars, and it's everyone wants to go and say that they've seen Steve Aoki, Will Clarke, Clarke. If you know what I mean, they no matter what the music is, they probably know the name over what the music they do and what the music they make and what the music they play. And I think it's part of, I actually had a really good conversation with a mate yesterday. And I think this whole coronavirus time has been really interesting for our industry, because club music doesn't really get streamed, and club music, because there's no clubs happening. And I think this is the time where some artists are going to be like, there's not going to be a career for them because they just make middle of the road club music. And then there's some artists that really want to push themselves and make really fucking good music. And I think during this time, it's actually allowed people to like sit back and be like, no, I don't want to do what everyone else is doing. I don't want to sound like everyone else. I'm just making music. Like when you're DJing, when you're touring, you're just making music to just kind of, it's a business card, really. It's a business card to like get you booked. And it's easy to go down that formulaic kind of vision as an artist and just like make music and just for the sake of it because you have to. Whereas I think in times like this, you don't have to make music. You only make music because you absolutely love making music. And I think now is the time when there's going to be some artists that are just going to be pushing their music to like another level, because you get time to as well. I had some sessions in London last week, and I was talking to one of the engineers there, and he was writing music for a lot of DJs just purely because the DJs didn't have time. And now they all have time, and now people can actually like be artists and not worry about the next 4 shows that they've got starting tomorrow, and having to rush something and making mediocre music. I think it's going to change, hopefully, anyway.
Yeah, we'll have to see what happens to the whole sort of nighttime industry, really, because nobody really quite knows how long the after effects from COVID are going to be. The kind of the big D-Day on all this is when everybody's vaccinated and and we start to move back to normality. But behavioural patterns, isn't it? Psychologists say that if you're put into a different behaviour for 4 or 5 months, then it sticks with you. Yeah. And behaviourally, a lot of people may not go back to nightclubs again. They may sort of say, we found other things to do. Yeah. There's other ways of spending our time, whether that's watching box sets or whether it's, getting exercise or whatever. People may not go to it in the same way that they did before. We can only wait and see. We can only speculate on it. But I think that everybody's going to have to raise their game. Definitely. And not just go back to where we were and expect everything to just magically carry on again. I think, for the nighttime industry, which is, is not just about DJs, it's all about the experience, it's all about it's about the venue, it's about the drinks, it's about the staff, it's about the headline, there's so many things that make that experience now. Like I say, back in the 90s, it was music. You'd go to a venue because they were playing trance. You'd go to a venue because they were playing house or whatever it was. Yeah. So you kind of you almost didn't care about the venue in many ways. Yeah. And in many ways, you didn't actually care too much about the DJ because it was the brand of the night that carried it through. So, if you went to Gatecrash, you were going to get one particular thing. If you went to Subliminal, you knew you were going to get something else. If you went to Pure Passion, you knew what you were going to get for that. In a way, the DJs were almost an afterthought. Mm-hmm. Head Candy being the perfect example. If you went to a Head Candy night, you knew exactly what you was going to get, but you'd never heard of any of the DJs that were playing. But it was a successful night. Whereas what started to happen after a while, like you say, is that the DJ became the focus of attention. Yeah. And so then it would sort of become DJ at whatever. Yeah. And so some things, look at Head Candy now. Head Candy is almost nothing now because it didn't have any star DJs. So when we get back eventually, and we will, if you believe everything that we read about, I think there's going to have to be some creative thinking and some creative production from the artists to get people back into it again, because they're not going to want to go back to where it was. They're going to need something new to entice them.
I totally agree. And I think just as a DJ, as a producer, I think it's a really exciting time to actually do something different, and kind of just change it up, because it was getting stagnant. It was like, why do you want to just like, even it's amazing. I'm super lucky to be in the position that I'm in, but I had like some people that would see me like 10 times in 1 year, and I'm like, why? Like, although I get although I get it, but I'm like, I'm bringing you different music each time, yes, but the venues that you're seeing me in aren't anything different. They're not. Yeah. It's not. I'm not bringing you like special production. I'm not like the venues aren't up in their game. The venues are staying the same every weekend. It's just they're just changing the music. But I think you're right. I think it is time for things to change. I don't know what it is, but it's going to be interesting.
It's going to be interesting to see what happens in Ibiza next year, because I think Ibiza is still sort of seen as the global clubbing capital.
Totally.
And can lead by example. So I sort of hope that a lot of people who are still, kind of over there and, are at the creative forefront now of putting on the events and developing venues and strategizing brands and all that kind of thing. I hope that they are kind of in creative thinking mode as to what we do next year, rather than sort of going back to where we were, because I think there'll be a certain amount of space for going back to where we were, but not a lot. I think stuff has to change.
Totally.
And this also goes through to, in Ibiza's case, the councils as well.
Yeah.
The politicians and, they all have to kind of decide what they want. If they want a different type of tourist, if they want different types of venues, if they want to change the operating hours and the licensing laws, all these kinds of things are all integral to the scene. They're all very important. And it's not just people at the sharp end that are affected by, everything that's happening now with the pandemic. It's also the people who, make the scene happen.
Totally.
And a lot of the time, these people can be quite boring people.
Yeah.
So, like I say, politicians, marketing people, all the rest of it. I just hope that people are thinking.
No, I agree.
Rather than just taking a year off and sort of waiting for this all go away and then pick up business as usual.
I think it's really interesting in Ibiza as well. Or I think maybe this will actually kind of be a bit of more of an eye opener to the politicians, to the kind of the people behind the scenes that we don't see, that we're always fighting against, if you know what I mean. Maybe this is as like, okay, like this scene generated a shitload of money for, like, let's say for instance Ibiza, like the amount of taxes that they're not going to be earning this year is going to be obscene. And the same for the rest of the world, really. Like the nightlife industry, not just clubs, like theaters, everything brings in so much, but yet there's always that battle there's that red tape that you're always having to battle against. It's like if we go over an extra hour, why, like you get fined, like the police come and shut you down, and it's like, oh come on, like you're actually by putting restrictions on people, you're actually stopping creativity. And it goes back to like your Radio London days. You just kind of did it and you got away with it, and it was great whilst you did it. But look at the after effects of what happened. Like look at the knock-on effect of what that had on radio. Whereas Ibiza was exactly the same back 10, 15 years ago. Even when I was there, you could see the knock-on effect. And then when the councils came in and started closing clubs down earlier, then the West End closed down at 3 a.m. or something like that. And you're just like, this is just stopping people to evolve culturally.
Yeah. Well, that's it. I mean, everybody's after a slice of the cake, really. And, councils started bringing in restrictions because of pressure from local people, but also because, they could be acquiring a lot of revenue that they weren't acquiring before. Yeah. Because, there's a huge amount of money that's generated in an industry that went as kind of crazy and overboard as that. I mean, where else would you go in the world and pay, 20 euros for a cocktail that's 2/3 ice? You do it because you're in Ibiza and that's what you do.
Yeah.
So in a way, my worry about that side of it is that once we come out of this, whenever it will be, is that I think people are going to be much more careful with money and with spending, and the kind of the frivolity of spending, 20 euros on a cocktail or, 250 euros on a table for two in a music venue with a DJ you've never heard of, I think might go away. and that people will be just a lot more selective. And I think one of the big disposable income bins, if I can put it that way, of the last decade has been the nighttime industry.
Totally.
So that's bars, that's music venues, entertainment. People with disposable income. That's where they were going to spend it.
Yeah.
Whereas now, we're moving into a globally a new era of possibly high unemployment, not just because of COVID, but because of things like AI and automation, stuff like that. And I think people, I almost kind of think we've gone through a bit of a golden age where, credit and spending was not a worry because tomorrow was always going to be another golden day. And I think what this particular time has brought round to people is that, tomorrow might not be another day.
Totally.
Back at, I'm so old that I can remember people saying, expressions like "we need to save for a rainy day."
Yeah.
And that's an expression that's disappeared from modern culture because people were always on about spending. We've been in an environment for the last 2 decades of spending money.
Yeah.
And I think this, because it's global, it's not just a particular country or a particular region that's got hit by this, because this is global, and that people, have been plunged into. I mean, in the UK, they've not been plunged into it yet, but they will be. This shock is coming. It's still a kind of a wave in the distance, but it's coming.
Yeah.
And we're going to have an economic shock. And I think, sadly, this time next year, people might not have the disposable income anymore to spend in nightclubs and music venues and on, holidays in Ibiza where you blow €2,000.
Yeah.
I think people are just going to think a little bit more.
I hope. I really hope that they do that, because I think it's a massive learning curve. I know it's been a learning curve for a lot of my mates and myself, of course, but it's that living within your means, and especially in America. And this is something that I've experienced in America and living in America and being English, coming from England and going to America. You can't do anything in America if you don't have a credit card. If you don't have credit, you can't get anything. You can't. And there's that constant be the best, spend the most money, show off your money. And I think a lot of it is no, you don't have to. You don't know what's going to happen tomorrow.
No, that's right. I think people have realised that shit happens.
Yeah.
And shit can sometimes be very big, and it can be life changing. And when you think, this pandemic was very, very quick to happen.
Yeah.
At the beginning of March, we were all
laughing.
At the beginning of April, we were all fucking hell, what's happened? And here we are, we're in August, and we're all still going, what's happening?
Yeah.
And this could go on for quite a while yet. We don't know. We're all assuming that 2021, it's all going to bounce back. I hope it will, and I feel it will, but it might not. And that's the uncertainty. What this era, this COVID era, as it will be called for the next 100 years, has brought in, is that the sun doesn't always shine.
No.
And that there's a risk element to your life in lots of ways that you can't control.
Yeah.
And that things like I say, my parents taught me, which is you need to save for a rainy day.
Yeah.
And it's well, what does that mean? And it's well, it's not always good.
Yeah.
These were generations that went through wars and real austerity and real depression, and so they knew that things could happen. And we've just been lucky to have an era of about sort of 40 years where nothing's happened.
Yeah.
Nothing's gone wrong.
Yeah.
And now something's gone wrong. And so people realise that stuff can go wrong.
Totally.
And so I think that, my worry is that the leisure industries of all types that don't offer good value, and this is the key now to the future, I don't think you'll have nightclubs in Ibiza being able to charge 50 and 60 euros to go and walk in the venue.
Yeah.
And then have the privilege of paying 4 times the price for a drink.
Yeah.
And treated like shit as well a lot of the time.
Yeah, totally.
These things are going to have to change, and I think that could be good for our industry. But there's no doubt there's going to be casualties as well.
Of course.
But hopefully the people that are left at the end of it and the people that are still going, which will be a smaller scene and a smaller industry, will be getting better value, more bang for their buck, if you like. They'll be getting better value from the venues and hopefully a more enjoyable experience overall. Because I think we've all it's the boiling frog syndrome. You've heard the boiling frog syndrome.
Yeah.
You know, you don't notice it until it's all gone horribly wrong.
Yeah.
And I think in many ways in Ibiza, it had all kind of gone wrong in many ways. People were almost bankrupting themselves to go and have a good experience. It shouldn't be like that.
No, it shouldn't.
You should be able to have a good experience at not some outrageous amount of money to do it. And hopefully that's where Ibiza will start to move in the future.
I think also it's about the whole industry not being greedy. And I think that is like from the venues, from the DJs, from the managers, from the agents, from everything, to be like, okay, guys, like we can't carry on like this. Like everyone has to get paid less, which means that everyone that goes pays less to go, and everyone experiences it for a lot less money and has a lot more fun, and doesn't wake up the next morning and looks at their bank account and being like, fuck, what did I do last night?
Yeah, that's right.
Which we've all done that, if you know what I mean. We've all done that. But I think it's like a collective that the industry has to come together and be like, okay, this is how we're doing it now. And we're making this purely about the customers that are coming to our shows. And how can we make the customers want to come back? How can we give them an experience? And the first thing is by making it affordable. Yeah, and making good bang for your buck. Really, I've always wanted that, and we always had that in England. Like, you used to be able to go to a nightclub for £5 and like have the best night of your life.
And then all of a sudden it became £20.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, why?
Yeah.
Nothing changed.
No.
You know, in fact, everything looks tired.
Yeah.
And I'm paying more to get in. And it was like that in Ibiza too. You know, there was a lot of venues that didn't spend any money on the venue. But in some ways there was a bit of sympathy, because I remember from running a venue, my DJ bill for the week probably trebled in the space of 2 years.
Yeah.
Just to get DJs and you know, and this is the thing, you know, any industry that becomes attractive to what I call the money people is going to suffer in the long run.
Totally.
So what started to happen in the music industry was we started to get, you know, DJs used to always have managers.
Yeah.
But the managers were always sort of, you know, quiet, you know, laid back people and just kind of wanted the best for their artists, but they weren't particularly greedy. Yeah. They just wanted to structure a career. But then what do we get? We got agents. Yeah. And once you start getting agents coming in, you've got good agents and you've got bad agents. But the one thing that agents have in common is that they're always going to try and hit you for the biggest bill they think they can get away with. Yeah. And so that is where things start to get monetized. And if DJs start to cost more, then admission prices have to go up. Yeah. And then, you know, some of the people that work for the club might get laid off because you can't afford the salary bill anymore. Yeah. And you know what I mean? There's people that come into the industry that are not there because of music. They're there because they can make a buck.
Totally. Yeah.
And when this industry is screwed over, they'll go into pottery or they'll go into selling cars.
Yeah.
These you know, this, and I've got nothing against them.
No, totally.
It's just that they exist.
Yeah.
They exist. And they will move from industry to industry. And I think over the last 10 years, they've been in our industry.
Yeah.
And I remember the growth of agents starting to happen around about 2005, 2006.
Yeah.
That's where it all started to happen. From where I used to have relationships with DJs directly to, you know, oh, you need to talk to my agent.
Yeah.
You know, you have to talk to my agent. And then I'd be saying things to the agent and sort of saying, well, last year, you know, for example, you only charged €1,000. Why has it gone to 2,000? Well, they're in demand. And, you know, and the agents would know how far they could take you.
Yeah.
And so, like I say, I've got nothing against it. It's just a factor of what happens in all these industries where money people come in.
Yeah.
You know, you could play them a trance track and a piece of tech house and say, identify those tracks. Which one is trance? Which one is tech house? And they're like, Oh, I don't know. I'm a clue, mate. They're not there for the music. They're certainly not interested in music. And then you could put up, talk about something that, the evolution of music from, 10 years before. They won't have a clue.
Yeah.
I was selling cars back then. I don't know. I haven't a clue. So every industry gets its money people.
Definitely.
And we've had a lot of money people around our industry for the last decade or so. No bad thing. A lot of people have done well out of it. Fine. But I just hope that they don't stay forever. I hope that we can go back to a scenario where the people that are booking gigs and the people that are managing DJs and venues and all that sort of stuff want to make a reasonable buck.
Yeah.
But they don't want to screw everybody at the same time.
I totally agree.
That'd be my wish.
I totally agree that, and I like that. I've had many situations where, like, I've played a show and it's done extremely well. I had it on my last tour. Actually, we did a show somewhere. I don't want to mention it, but and my manager used to be an agent. We used to be like one of the biggest agents in America. And it's funny how he was like, it's wild this, because I've booked artists in this venue for 5 times the amount you earned tonight, and they didn't sell that many tickets. And it's, I think that's the thing, is like, there's venues that look at a name and value this name. For some reason, there's a name and they have to value it because they're told that they have to. But then there's other names that they don't necessarily value as much, but it's worth the same. But the bigger name, they won't make that much money on that night. But the smaller name, they're going to make a shitload of money. And they're not necessarily going to spread that between anyone else. It's just how it works. I think for me, speaking to a lot of promoter mates and things like that, I think it just needs to go back to how it used to be with like rock bands, or how it still is with bands, where you get a door split and you get a bar split. And if 2,000 people come to your venue, you all take your expenses out of it, and then you split what comes up. And you will work out how much is sold at the bar, and everyone's honest and no one's being hiding or anything. No one's doing anything dodgy. And this is how much the bar made. You get your 10%, you get your 5%. This is how much the door made. You get 40%. And I think that way it creates better relationships for everyone, but it also makes the artists become better artists because they have to perform. And they
have to market.
They have to. Yep. And you have to be, I'm sorry, but we live in a day and age where you're not just a producer and you're not just a DJ. You're not just a promoter. You're everything. Like, I market more than a lot of people do. If you know what I mean, I spend a lot more time, me and my team, we spend so much time talking about how are we going to market this? How are we going to do this? How are we going to launch it? And I've got a lot of friends that do exactly the same. And I think when you, like, if you're working with a promoter and 2 of you are marketing together, it's better than 1 of you. And then everyone succeeds. And I think it's just about coming together and not looking at the artist, at the agent, at the manager, at the venue as your enemy. Because that happens so much. So many people are like, oh, fuck this venue or fuck this promoter. Like, let's just go and get some money and let's crack on. It's like, no, like, we want to make this. At the end of the day, you forget what we're doing it for. We're doing it for the music, and we're doing it to entertain people. Fucking just got to entertain people.
Well, you took the words out of my mouth in a way, because I remember, when I first started doing events, we would do things like door splits and stuff, and even into Ibiza. We would, we might even give an artist one of the bars in the venue, something like that. And then when the kind of the more formalized agreement started to come in through agents and management companies, it brought in an element of distrust, because you'd sort of say, well, normally what we do is to give the DJ a split of the door. So, if they pull 3,000 people, they're going to walk away with a lot of money.
Yeah.
If they pull 300, they're going to think, oh, I need to work harder.
Yeah.
And the agents would sort of say, well, how do we know you're being honest?
Yeah.
So they would start to bring in this element of distrust between the artist and the venue, which ultimately is the relationship that matters.
Yeah.
You know, whoever runs the venue will book the artist. But then you also get, you know, agents, when you go to a higher level, if I wanted to put on a lineup that you know, was a musically good lineup and an attractive lineup in terms of, you know, I'd know each DJ on the lineup would sell their, you know, do their marketing in advance, or they had a good record out at the time, or they had a good track record. I might want to book 3 DJs, pay whatever money it was to get those DJs, and I'd be happy. But when agencies started coming in and signing up lots of artists, then the agents would sort of say, well, we'll only do it as long as you don't book that artist. Yeah. So you have to book our artists. Yeah. So then they started compromising my ability as a promoter or venue manager to put the lineup on that I wanted. Yeah. And I'd be putting on artists that an agency or a management group were trying to promote. Yeah. So, you know, just for an example, say I wanted to book Paul van Dyk, then Paul van Dyk's management, and because Paul more or less manages himself, then, you know, this is not a real example. Yeah. But, you know, his management company might sort of say, well, we want you to put 2 more Vandit artists on, not have Tiesto. Yeah. So, you know, the lineups that we had in 2003 might not be possible now. Yeah. Because of people who've got nothing to do with the industry in that pure sense of, I know the music, I know the venue, and I know the DJs.
And you know your crowd. You know your crowd.
Money people.
You know your audience more than any. You know your audience better than the DJs to a certain extent, because the DJs are just turning up. Unless you're a resident, like, you know everything. And I think it's an interesting thing that. I think it's just about kind of taking it back to the roots side of thing. And don't get me wrong, there's still going to be a lot more money in it than there was back in the day. Yeah. There's still people have a lot more money, even during coronavirus, even after coronavirus, people still have a lot more money. But it's about, I think it's just about bringing that honesty back to what we started, really.
Well, let's just hope, you know, it's going to make people work harder. Yeah. To produce something that's better than it was before. Totally. Because I think that's the only way we're going to start getting people back is to kind of raise the bar a little bit, and you know, put on a better show, provide a better experience for less money. Yeah. Because although not everybody thinks of the cost of something, I think people are going to start becoming more aware of the value of something. And you know, I hope it goes that way, because, you know, I'd love to see the industry come back.
Yeah, man.
But I don't think it's going to be a walkover. I think it's going to be a struggle.
I agree.
To get it back. So, you know, and going back to what we were saying earlier, I think, you know, it's not just the industry, it's, you know, radio stations, streaming services are all going to have their part to play in this as well. Totally. Because, you know, without people who are the, if you like, the talent in the nighttime industry, getting their getting their creativity out to a wide audience, then people aren't going to come back. There's a lot of people that need to get involved in this, not probably in a coordinated way, but in a way that's just intuitive. Yeah. People are going to have to know that if I want people to download tracks off my site, then there's going to have to be an industry out there to do it. Yeah. Because I'd love to see the figures for things like, you know, Spotify and Apple Music, and see what's been happening to downloads over the last 6 months. Be interested to see if they've gone down or up. I don't know. They've
gone down in dance music. They've gone down about 20%.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. Well, again, you know, intuitively, I thought that might be the case, that, you know, people would start to lose interest in it because they're not doing it.
Yeah, exactly.
They're not doing it anymore. Yeah. And so, you know, that's, you know, I could see us looking back on this in 20 years time and sort of going, that's what killed it. It was that era that killed it, and it didn't have to kill it. It could have been brought back to life. Yeah. But it's like, you know, it is kind of like bringing it back to life, because, you know, when something's injured so badly, you've got to take care of it.
Yeah, totally.
And recuperate.
Totally.
and make it happen again. So, yeah, let's hope so, eh?
Let's hope so. Right, mate. We've just done 1 hour and 54 minutes. That's
long enough, I think.
That's long enough. Let's wrap this one up. Dude, Tom, thank you so much, man. It has been a pleasure to catch up. We could probably talk all day long.
It's been great, mate. It's been great talking about the days, yeah. And good to see you again, mate.
You too, mate. Come down. My parents say hi as well, so they send their love. And let's catch up soon.
Fantastic. Yeah, I will. Yeah, once things get a little more kind of straightened out, I'll definitely do it. Yeah, yeah. And then I might even come see you at a gig in America.
Why not? Know. Why not? In 10 years' time.
Exactly.
All right, mate.
See you soon, mate.
Keep safe. See you soon. Bye.
Take it easy. See you soon.
That is a wrap. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. I could talk to that guy all day long. There's so many stories we'd missed out as well. There's just literally, we could probably do like a whole series of just Ibiza stories of what we used to kind of get up to. Amazing times. But yeah, thank you to everybody that's listened. Thank you for Tom for being on here. If you like the show, please share it, send it to anyone if you fancy. But yeah, keep safe and I'll see you soon.